We have already read Isaiah chapter 9, verses 1 through 7. What I want to talk about today is how to meditate on Christmas, part 2. You will experience little spiritual growth until you learn how to actually start to meditate. And for Christians, that means meditate on the Scripture. All right? And one of the things I've discovered is many people who have been Christians for their entire life actually don't really know how to read the Word. Like, they can read it, they can see the words, but they don't know how to get something out of it. They don't know how to meditate on it. And so what we're doing is we're kind of practicing on some of these famous Christmas passages. So last week we were in Micah chapter 5, O little town of Bethlehem, and we talked about that. This week we're going to be in Isaiah 7. You remember that passage? The virgin shall be with child. The virgin shall conceive. Very famous passage. And we're also going to be in Isaiah 9. Unto us a child is born. The people dwelling in darkness have seen a great light. But I want to read those against John chapter 8, where Jesus says, I'm the light of the world. Because I think there's a connection. And I'm going to try to show it to you this morning. So I just want to say this up front. I'm going to take something pretty complex, and I'm going to try to make it simple so that you can understand it, but we are going to cover a lot of ground. Okay? So here's the outline. First of all, I want to give you an idea. It's just going to be a simple idea. And then we're going to look at an Old Testament passage, Isaiah 7, 8, and 9. And then we're going to look at a New Testament passage, John 7, 8, and 9. And what I want to try to do is take that idea and show you the structural similarities between those two passages, show you how they're connected, and show you why it matters. And along the way, I'm going to give you 2 questions to help make it practical. Okay? So this is the outline. There's an idea, Old Testament passage, Isaiah 7, 8, and 9. New Testament passage, okay, John 7, 8, and 9. And then 2 questions that'll help you apply it, the meditate part. All right? So here's the idea. First of all, I'm calling it a pre-echo. And you're sitting here thinking, Christian, what's a pre-echo? Okay, because I just made that word up. All right? Okay, everybody knows what an echo is, right? Do you guys know what an echo? Have you ever been? I'm from Montana. There's places where you can get up and you're looking out over the mountains and there's a big canyon and you go, hello! And what you hear, there was no echo, but you hear, hello, hello, hello. It's really cool. Okay, so you have a shout, and then the echoes are always fainter, and they go off in the distance, all right? That's what an echo is. Now, listen, wouldn't it be amazing if you stepped up to shout, and you actually heard, hello, 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 and you opened your mouth, and out came the hello, and you'd be like, whoa, wait just a second. How did the echo come first? And you're like, whoa, but before you get the whoa out, you hear whoa, whoa, whoa. You see what I'm saying? What if the echo came before? That would be really crazy. Pre-echo. Now listen, there are actually places where we experience or see something like a pre-echo. You guys ever experienced deja vu? Okay. You know what that is? Like, you're doing something, all of a sudden you're like, whoa, I feel like I remember doing this before, even though there's no way I could possibly, because it's happening right now. That's kind of like a pre-echo thing, deja vu. There's another one. If you read books, sometimes the author does what is called foreshadowing. Drops hints, drops clues. And then when the thing finally happens, you're like, oh my gosh, how did I not see this coming all along? There were all of these echoes. Boom, here's the shout. All right? Now listen, it also happens in movies. I'm going to give you an example. There's an explosion, like a bomb or an attack, okay? And all of a sudden, the filmmakers switch everything into slow motion. And you can see pieces raining down and people are running for cover. And all of the sound goes weird. It sounds really far away and echoey. And then all of a sudden, it comes together and you hear the person like, get down. You see what I'm saying? He was saying it all along, but you couldn't hear it clearly. Now listen, that's another example where you get echoes and everything's muddy and fuzzy, and then clarity, shout, pre-echo. I'm calling this thing a pre-echo or a reverse echo or whatever. That's the idea. Make sense? Okay. Now listen, the reason I'm sharing that is that the Bible does something like this. Okay? Not in a specific scene or passage. So in other words, this is not like a little technique that a Bible author uses. It actually plays out as part of the bigger story, the story as a whole. Let me say it this way. In the Bible's story, the big story, Adam's sin, all the way back in Genesis chapter 3, that's the explosion. And everything that comes after, particularly in the New Testament, is that pre-echo. And so as you read, in the Old Testament, as you're reading through the Old Testament and you're like, this is weird. This doesn't make any sense. The Bible's like, yeah, the Old Testament is a pre-echo sort of thing that all of a sudden gets clear when Jesus comes in the New Testament. Getting clearer, okay? The pattern plays out over huge time frames. It involves the stories of people, the story of their lives, the stories of the rise and fall of nations. But once you start to see that pattern, this idea of a pre-echo, it's hard to unsee it. And once you do that, you start to make connections that actually change how you read and how you apply. So that's my idea of a pre-echo. And I'm just going to mention two passages in case you're like, Christian, you are absolutely crazy. And be like, no, I think you can see signs of this in the New Testament. Do you remember the passage, 1 Corinthians 13:12, where Paul says, now we see through a glass darkly, but then we're going to see face to face. Now, he's saying we still don't see fully clearly yet, but his point is things are getting clearer, clearer, clearer. There's going to come a time when we're going to see face to face. But what that means right now, we still don't. We're in the pre-echo part a little bit. Okay? There's another passage in Colossians chapter 2, verse 17, where Paul says, these things are shadows, but Christ is the substance. He's the reality. Do you hear that idea of a pre-echo? In other words, we're getting all of this foreshadowing, these echoes, but Christ is where everything comes together with clarity. And I just want to say this. I actually think our world feels this way to us. We have a deep sense that this is a beautiful place, that things matter, but we also have a sense that things aren't right. Something's wrong. We are reeling. And the Bible would say, yeah, you are experiencing this pre-echo, which is all an effect of Adam's fall, amplified by many, many falls over and over and over and over since then. You see what I'm saying? And in Christ, we actually get the shout, the clarity. Okay? So, that's the idea. Pre-echo. Pretty easy. Okay. Now you ready? Isaiah chapter 7, 8, and 9. I'm going to show you what's going on in the passage. Okay? Welcome to All Souls, where we do like 4 chapters out of Isaiah and 3 chapters out of John, all on one Sunday. Okay, I actually want to start in Isaiah chapter 6. I'm just going to mention this very briefly. Look at verse 1. In the year that King Uzziah died, I, Isaiah, saw the Lord sitting on his throne, high and lifted up. The train of his robe filled the temple. He has a vision of heaven. Let me tell you what's going on. It's about, this is earlier, last week when we were talking about Micah, I said, let's pretend it's 725. That's a pretty good guesstimate, BC. This is probably 750 BC. So it's earlier still, all right? Israel as a country is in the middle of civil war. So to the south you have Judah, and to the north you have 10 tribes which are calling themselves Israel, but there's conflict between, okay? Uzziah is the southern king. Uzziah dies, and he's going to be replaced by the next king, who is Ahaz. When Uzziah dies, Isaiah, the prophet in the southern kingdom, has a vision. Okay? Isaiah is one of the holiest people in the whole land of Israel, north or south. And part of this vision, all of a sudden he's in God's temple, and God's like, not even Isaiah is clean. Isaiah's like, woe is me, I'm a man of unclean lips. And God says, I'll atone for you. Really interesting. Throne room scene. And then God says to Isaiah, who will go? I've got a message for God's people. Who's going to take it? And Isaiah's like, here I am, send me. Okay? And then God says, this is the part I want you to see. Look down at verse 9. He says, here's what you're going to tell the people. Keep on hearing, but don't understand. Keep on seeing, but do not perceive. Make the heart of this people dull and their ears heavy, and blind their eyes, lest they see and hear and understand and turn. Now, what I want you to see here, first of all, that feels a little weird. But what I want you to see is Isaiah expects that his message is going to be confusing. Okay? In other words, God's like, I have a message, but it's going to be confusing, which is exactly what I was just talking about with this idea of a pre-echo. Like, what is going on? It doesn't make sense. Okay? Now look at Isaiah chapter 7, verse 1. In the days of Ahaz. Okay, so Ahaz is the next king, all right, of Judah in the south. Okay, and here's what you need to know about Ahaz. He is a bad dude. He is wicked.
Is he married to Jezebel?
That's Ahab. Yeah, okay. So Ahaz comes later, but he's not a great dude. Actually, he might come after. Yeah, he does. Okay. Here's what I want you to see, though. He's a wicked king in the midst of civil war, and this is where things are going to get confusing, so I'm going to simplify it for you. All right. Think Austin. Okay? Austin is Judah. Okay? So Israel to the north, that's Cedar Park. Okay? And Damascus, okay, that's Round Rock. All right? And then he's going to mention Assyria, that's Dallas. And eventually you're going to hear about somebody out in the east, Babylon, Houston. Okay? So here's what I want you to think. You've got,
Fair.
Yeah, listen, this works. Trust me, I thought a lot about this. I'm like, how the heck am I going to explain this thing? Okay, so listen, you have the king of Austin. Okay, that's Ahaz. All right? And Cedar Park teams up with Round Rock to come take on Austin, Ahaz. Okay? And Ahaz is like, oh my gosh, they've got more people than I do. And God says, send Isaiah the prophet to tell this wicked king. Now, here's what you would expect. The wicked king, what do you think God's going to say? You wicked king, you are going to get what's coming to you. Smack. Doesn't get it. Instead, God says, relax. I'm going to take care of these guys for you. Okay, now flip the page. Right at the top, Isaiah 7, this is verse 8. Within 65 years, Ephraim, okay, basically this is saying, within 65 years, Cedar Park and Round Rock are going to be desolate. I'm going to get rid of your enemies for you. And then the Lord spoke to Ahaz. This is verse 10 of Isaiah 7. Ask for a sign from God. So Isaiah comes to the wicked king, says, guess what? I've got great news. God's on your side. And everybody's like, what? The prophet of God saying God's on Ahaz's side? And he's like, yes, God's going to rescue you. Okay? You're going to be delivered from Cedar Park and Round Rock. Ask for a sign. And Ahaz is like this super pious, like, oh, I'm not going to ask the Lord for a sign. And I can see Isaiah roll his eyes and be like, fine, the Lord's going to give you a sign anyway. And then he says this very famous passage. This is in verse 14. Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and you shall call his name Emmanuel, which means God with us. Okay. You're like, Christian, what is going on here? All right. So, Cedar Park and Round Rock team up against Austin. The prophet goes to Austin and says, don't worry about these guys. I'm going to take care of them for you. I'm going to deliver you. I'm going to give you a sign. I'm going to give you a sign, and there's going to be a kid. Virgin's going to conceive, and you're going to call this kid's name God with us. That's his nickname. God with us. So you've got a wicked king who's going to have a son, or somebody's going to have a son, okay, whose nickname is God with us, and somehow that son is going to experience, and this is what's really weird, what comes after this is very confusing. Because right down in verse, this is verse 15. He shall eat curds and honey. Does that sound good or bad? Honey sounds good. Curds are like cottage cheese, I think. So like honey on your cottage cheese. Okay. So listen, that's a good thing. That's a peaceful thing. But then right after that, the prophet says, but the land is going to be desolate. That's a weird thing. So here's the image. Okay? You're going to have the virgin's going to conceive, and I'll explain what that means in just a second. You're going to have a boy that everybody calls God with us, and there's going to be in one way like peace and plenty. Here's the little kid eating his curds and honey, but he's looking out over a landscape that is absolutely desolate because it's been laid bare by war. Okay? Cedar Park and Round Rock are gone. And it's like, wow, what's going on? This is really interesting. And then God says this, okay? But after this, Assyria is going to come. This is in chapter 8. In other words, who got rid of Cedar Park and Round Rock? Dallas. So enjoy it while you can, because Dallas is going to come for you too. Okay? Now, let me back up for just a second. The virgin shall conceive. First of all, if you guys spend any time around like scholars, people that study, what they're going to tell you is that in the Hebrew, the original Hebrew, the word was not virgin, it was just young girl. And they're right. The young girl will conceive. Okay? It would have been what you would call somebody that hadn't had kids yet. Okay? Now, when it got translated, here's the point, not by the Christians. It was translated into Greek. This is the Septuagint, a couple hundred years before Jesus. Jews translated it. They actually picked the word virgin in Greek. Okay? Here's what I want, and so scholars are like, oh, it wasn't really a virgin, some scholars, it wasn't really a virgin, it was just a young girl. The Christians misunderstood the prophecy because they're reading the wrong translation. No. Listen, everybody would have heard this. When they read and when they heard about this prophecy, those two things meant the exact same thing to them. In other words, in ancient Israel, virgins conceived all the time. Do you know how it happened? They had sex. They got pregnant. All the text is saying is there's going to be somebody close to Ahaz that has never had a kid, and all of a sudden she's going to be pregnant, and that's going to be this God with us person. Okay? Here's the second thing. Well, who gets pregnant? And this is, scholars also disagree on this. Some think it's Isaiah's wife. And if you look over in chapter 8, Isaiah says, this is verse 3, I went into the prophetess, and she conceived and bore a son. They're like, that must be it. But here's the thing. If you read in Isaiah chapter 7, when Isaiah first comes, he already has a son with him. So it's probably not a young woman who's never had kids, virgin. I don't think it's Isaiah's wife. Who might it be? And the answer is, it might actually be Ahaz's wife. Okay? Now, here's what I want you to think about. Well, first of all, this is not clear. Okay? Which is exactly what we'd expect because things are confusing. Okay? Emmanuel means God with us. Do you know who Ahaz's son ended up being? It's a guy named Hezekiah, who was one of the godliest people of the kings in the Old Testament besides David. So you see what I'm saying? In other words, you're going to have a son, and you're going to call him God with us because you're going to experience this great rescue from God. All right? And that son is going to go on. In fact, the entire book of Isaiah is really about the journey of Hezekiah. Okay? And he is godly, but he's not godly enough to save his people from their sins. Because what happens in the end is Hezekiah, you can read about this in Isaiah 36 through 39, they actually get faced. Dallas comes down. Okay? Hezekiah gets sick. The prophet says, you're going to die. He has an amazing recovery. They put a fig balm on a boil. And he recovers. And then God miraculously intervenes and rescues from Dallas. Okay? And Hezekiah's like, yes. And then Isaiah goes, but Houston's coming. And eventually, in 586, that's when when Jerusalem is going to fall to Houston, to the Babylonians. Okay. So you've got a kid named God with us, born of a virgin, okay, eating curds and honey. Cedar Park and Round Rock are gone. Who did it? Dallas. This is Hezekiah's life struggle. Okay, but God says eventually I'm going to rescue from Dallas, but Houston's coming. Okay, now you get to chapter 9. Okay, look at verse 2. In the latter time he has made glorious the way of the sea, the land beyond Jordan, Galilee of the nations. Okay, the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwell in a land of deep darkness, on them the light has shone. You've multiplied the nation. You've increased its joy. He's talking about people that have been rescued from God, from their enemies. And in the short term, that could very easily be Cedar Park and Round Rock. In the midterm, it's from Dallas. But long term, they're actually going to get taken over by Houston. Okay? What I want you to see is, when he says, unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, the government shall be upon his shoulder. Do you see how that could easily point to Hezekiah? All right? That's the pattern, okay, in Isaiah. And there's one other thing I want to point out. Look at chapter 8, verses 12 and 13. Now let's read 11, too. The Lord spoke thus to me. So this is actually, God slips in a little message to Isaiah. And he said, he warned me not to walk in the way of this people. Remember, these are wicked people. Wicked king, wayward people. And God says, Isaiah, whatever you do, make sure you don't walk in the way of the people. And then look at verse 12. Do not fear what they fear, nor be in dread. But the Lord of hosts, him you shall honor as holy. Let him be your fear. Let him be your dread. Okay. This gets us to our first question. What does it look like to dwell in darkness? Ask yourself, what do I fear and what do I dread? That's actually what your darkness is. Do you see what I'm saying? We're meditating on the text. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. So the very first thing you should do is you should say, man, where do I feel most afraid? What are the things that I most dread? Okay? And then you should say, what God is telling me, the things that keep you up at night, I know what some of them are for me. God is saying, Christian, don't fear those things. You need to fear me instead. All right? Listen, most people point to the things that they fear and they say, that's my problem. Okay? God says, no, not honoring me, not fearing me enough, that's your problem. Isn't that interesting? Question.
I have the fear of the Lord, I think I've been thinking about for a while, and I hear a lot like it's more of a reverence or respect, the fear of the Lord. I don't think I've ever heard it like seen it written like this, where you have to dread the Lord.
Yeah. So what I'm not now listen, what I'm not doing here, I could preach a whole sermon on just that. What I want you to see this. So the first thing you should see is, does it actually say that in the text? And it comes close to it, doesn't it? It seems okay. So what we want to do is we want to go, whoa, what the heck is this fear of the Lord thing? Does that mean I should dread the Lord? Okay. Now, and what I want you to do is, rather than just try to answer it, sit with that for just a little bit. You're going to meditate on that. You're going to think about that. And you're going to go, oh, there is a passage. You're going to come back to. So anytime you think about fear of the Lord, you should mentally go, oh, I know that this is a passage that I'm going to look at, I'm going to meditate on, I'm going to think about, and somehow whatever your definition of fear of the Lord is, it needs to take this into account. Okay? That's a great question. All right, you're starting to meditate. So that's the structure. We've got our idea, the pre-echo. We've got the structure of Isaiah 7, 8, and 9. I'm going to give you the structure of John 7, 8, and 9. So flip to the New Testament. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. I'm going to try to do this one a little bit quicker.
John 8, right?
Yeah, but I want you to start in John 7. Okay? Is everybody following this so far? Like, this is, wait till you see the connection here. I think it's going to be worth it. John chapter 7. Who is John about? Who are any of the Gospels about? Jesus. Good answer. When in doubt, Jesus. Okay. John chapter 7, look at verse 40. Jesus has just gone up to a feast. It's called the Feast of Booths. It's the Feast of Tabernacles. It's when all the people of God would, every year, they'd get together and they'd live in tents for a week to remember how they lived in tents in the desert when they were coming out of Egypt, and God dwelt in a tent with them, the tabernacle, Old Testament. All right? So it's a major celebration, and Jesus shows up and he is teaching in the temple around Jerusalem. People are listening to him, and look at what they say. When they hear his words, some of the people are saying, this has got to be the prophet. Okay? Others are like, this is the Christ. But then others said, is Christ to come from Galilee? Okay, in other words, how did they know Jesus from Galilee? His accent gave him away. Galilee was hick town. So Jesus talked like a hick. He wasn't formally educated. So whatever you think a hick sounds like, make Jesus sound like that now. And some of the people were like, look at what they say. Hasn't the scripture said that Christ comes from the offspring of David and comes from Bethlehem, the village where David was? So there was division among the people over him. And some of them, the religious leaders, wanted to arrest him, but no one dared to lay hands on him. Now the officers came to the chief priests and the Pharisees, who said, why didn't you arrest him? And the officers answered, no one's ever spoken like this guy, even though he speaks like a hick. And the Pharisees answered, have you been deceived too? Have any of the authorities or the Pharisees believed in him? But this crowd does not know the law, and they're accursed. Now, I want you to notice something here. The Pharisees are the experts They're the ones that study their Bibles. They've got most of it memorized. So if anybody should really know things, it should be them. Okay? The second thing, they're like, none of the Pharisees believe in him. And then you got Nicodemus, who's like, do you see the humor in this? Remember who Nicodemus is? Comes to Jesus in John chapter 3 and actually has a conversation with him. By the end of John, you're going to find out that Nicodemus is a full-on follower. But the Pharisees are like, none of us Pharisees believe in this guy. And Nicodemus is like, shouldn't we listen to him first? And they're like, shut up. Okay? And they say right at the end, verse 52, are you from Galilee too, Nicodemus? Hick. Search and see, no prophet arises from Galilee. In other words, go check the scriptures, dummy. No prophet comes from Galilee. Now, what I want you to do is flip the page. And what you're going to see is John chapter 8. I want you to skip verses 1 through 11. That wasn't in the earliest manuscripts. We know that. The earliest manuscripts that we have don't have. So what I want you to do is pretend you're dealing with an early manuscript. And the words out of the Pharisees' mouth are, search and see, no prophet comes from Galilee. And Jesus stands up and goes, verse 12, I'm the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Does that sound like anything we just read? Isaiah 9. Okay, do you see what I'm saying? Jesus is quoting Isaiah 9, he's alluding to Isaiah 9, and he's making this statement, Galilee of the Gentiles, the people dwelling in darkness, have seen a great light. Who is Jesus saying he is? The great light that's referenced in Isaiah 9. Okay, now here's what I want you to see. Jump forward to John 9. This is a very famous story, and we're just going to run through it really quick. Okay? Jesus heals a man born blind. Now, as he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. This is verse 1. And his disciples said, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? In other words, they look at this guy who's blind, who can't see, and what they conclude, they have this like theological debate going on. Clearly, somebody screwed up. Was it him before he was even born? Is it possible to sin while you're still in the womb? Or was it his parents? And Jesus goes, neither of those. This is for God's glory. And then what he does is he heals him. Okay? Now here's what I want you to observe. How does he heal him? He makes some mud and he puts it on his eyes. Just remember that detail for just a second. It's really interesting. Okay. This happens on a Sabbath. The Pharisees go, what are you doing walking around on the Sabbath carrying your mat? And the guy's like, I can see. And they're like, yeah, but you're carrying your mat. But I can see, I've been blind. And they're like, you weren't really blind. Okay, you were faking it. He's like, dude, I was born blind. And they go and they get his parents, and the parents are like, he can answer for himself. This whole thing goes on. Now, what I want you to see is, they're like, this man, this is down in verse 16, this man can't be from God, for he works on the Sabbath. Jesus. Okay, now flip over. For the second time, this is down in verse 24, they called the man who had been blind, and they're like, give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner. I love his answer. He's like, I don't know if he's a sinner or not. What I know is, I was blind, now I see. Okay? They said to him, verse 26, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? He's like, I've told you already, you wouldn't listen. Do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples? Then they reviled him. That means they mocked him. Okay? Saying, you're his disciples. We're disciples of Moses. Snooty faces. Okay? We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from. The man who had been healed said, this is an amazing thing. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. Okay? We know that God does not listen to sinners, But if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, God listens to him. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. And they said, you were born in utter sin. Would you teach us? And they cast him out. What that means is not just that they threw him out of the building, they excommunicated him. Okay? And that would have been huge in that culture, because it's a culture of family honor. When you get excommunicated, they're like, you're not really a Jew anymore. You can't come to the temple. Everybody in your extended family is like, oh my gosh. You want to talk about shame? This guy feels it. Now, here's what I want you to see. Okay? Let me look at my notes. Let's connect the dots. You've got people who think they see God, Pharisees, and they actually get blinder and blinder as they go through the passage. You've got somebody who's never seen anything and who says, I don't know anything, and he starts to become wise and truly see. He doesn't just see with his eyes, he actually recognizes Jesus is from God. Okay? They respond by casting him out, excommunication. They become blind to him. We're going to ignore you. Okay? Jesus actually reveals himself. Look down at verse 35 to 37. When Jesus heard that they had cast him out, he found him and he said, do you believe in the Son of Man? And the guy answered, who is he, that I might believe in him? And Jesus said, you have seen him, and it is he who is speaking to you now. It's me. And look at what the guy says, Lord, I believe, and he worshiped him. In the Bible, who's the only person you're supposed to worship? Who? God. Well, in the Old Testament, God. But in the New Testament, he worships Jesus. Okay. Then Jesus says this, for judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see, blind people may see, but those who think they see are going to become blind. Does that sound similar to what we heard in Isaiah about always seeing but not really seeing, not understanding, not perceiving? Okay, let me connect the dots. In Hezekiah, you have a little human God with us. Everybody knows he's not really God, but that's what we call him. He's flawed, Hezekiah. Born from a virgin, but we know he was really born in the ordinary way from virgins. The virgin had sex and got pregnant. God's people get rescued from Cedar Park and Round Rock. There's some light, but then there's Dallas, the Syrians. That's very dark. God tells Hezekiah he's going to die in Isaiah 38. But then you've got this miraculous recovery with a paste of figs. He's saved from Dallas, but Houston's coming. Hezekiah eventually dies. The nation eventually falters and fails. It's very, very confusing. And along comes Jesus, who is God really with us. God in the flesh. God who can be worshiped. He's born of a virgin, as in really born of a virgin, without sex. Do you see how the echo is being amplified, ramped up, clarified? Jesus brings light and life everywhere he goes. Jesus' light is so potent that when he encounters a man born blind, I mean, we're talking genetic, biological, eyes don't work. And nature goes, oops, I better realign myself for this light. Boom, the eyes start working. Okay? Hezekiah gets a paste made from figs. Jesus applies a paste made from dirt and spit. The man sees, but he gets cast out into social darkness. But guess what? He's not afraid of death anymore. You don't see any fear in this guy from these religious leaders, because he's seen Jesus. He's seen God with us in the flesh. How can he be afraid of anything else? What can man do to me?
Well, he wasn't able to go into the temple before either, right?
Yeah.
Because he was in.
He's like, listen, you can't do anything that hasn't already been done.
Yeah.
Keep me out of the temple? I haven't been in the temple. Take away my eyesight? Listen, that's happened already. I have seen, and I've seen something greater than just the world or the people in it. Jesus, unlike Hezekiah, doesn't have a near-death experience. He actually goes through it. He experiences death for all of us. But he comes out the other side. He opens the door to the kingdom that can never be conquered. What I want you to see is there is a really clear correlation between Isaiah 7, 8, and 9 and John 7, 8, and 9. And you get these murky echoes that get massively amplified in Jesus. Isaiah is murky and confusing. With Jesus, it starts to become much, much clearer. So here's our last question. What does it look like to live in light? Remember, the people dwelling in darkness have seen a great light. So when you think about the darkness, what you do is you say, what are my fears and what are my dreads? Okay? But what does it look like to live in the light? Jay, here's how I'd answer your question about fear of the Lord. I'd actually point to this passage and say, you want to know what fear of the Lord looks like? It looks like seeing Jesus, believing Jesus, worshiping Jesus. If you do those things, you will fear the Lord in the right way. Do you see what I'm saying? You take these passages and you go, oh my goodness, there's this massive connection. And in the old one, the Old Testament, I see the emphasis on the fear connecting to darkness, but in the new one, I see the emphasis on Jesus connecting to light. And this guy's response to Jesus is to believe and to worship. What did somebody say? Okay. All right. Ransom speaking in tongues over there. What the fear of the Lord looks like. Listen, most of us don't see Jesus clearly. We see things we fear clearly. And I think what John is telling us is that fear of the Lord looks like it's actually love of Jesus. We need to believe that it's possible to see Jesus clearly, like really and truly. That he promises to reveal himself to those who know they can't see. That's what it says in this passage. Jesus says, I come, and people that think they see are going to end up being blind. But people that know they don't see are actually going to have their eyes opened. And our response to Jesus, I know so many people, they actually don't really believe that Jesus is going to become real to them. They don't really believe that God speaks through the scriptures. And as a result, they don't bother looking. They don't bother seeking. They're not actually longing for something different. And the point here is Jesus says that this is what he does. So we need to ask ourselves, do I want that? We need to realize that this life, even with Jesus, is still going to feel very murky and confusing at times. That's not a sign of God's absence, but rather a sign of his pursuit. This is how God works with people over big scales of time. So when you feel darkness, one of the things you can say is like, oh, this is how God works. And I'm going to look for him in it. And I'm going to focus on Jesus. And I'm going to go, what do I fear? Now, what does it look like to not fear those things because I actually see and trust Jesus more than what I'm afraid of? That's what you start to do when you meditate. And I could preach a whole sermon just on that. But the point, do you see what I'm saying? There's this idea of a pre-echo. These two passages connect. When you start to see it, you can read the passages against each other, and that allows you to meditate on things like darkness and on things like light. Because Jesus says that what Isaiah was talking about, he actually does better and truer. Okay. A lot, right? Overwhelmed? Let's pray.